Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 6th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Well, it's not too bad here in Plymouth, a little bit chilly, but still quite a lot of blue sky. We understand it's brightening up in the Netherlands, which is always a good thing.
We'll get straight on then with Samantha Baldwin, who has apparently been tracked down, and the two children are being described as, quotes, safe. I didn't doubt for 1 second they would be anything other than safe. Now, of course, she went missing with her sons following a family court hearing in Nottingham at the end of March, where custody had been removed for the children. And so she disappeared. The children were considered to be under a court order, and the police then created a furore in the media, a manhunt, if you want to call it that. Spent lots of money on tracking her down. That's finally been done. And they have also arrested two women, aged 62 and 36, on suspicion of assisting an offender, and they've been released on bail. So it's interesting, Brian, that I assume it's because there was a hunt for these three that the children have been named and the children have been imaged and images all over the mainstream media, which is really pretty unprecedented for a child-related case.
I'm going to say yes and no, Mike, because of course when the authorities want to change the rules or break the law, they just do it to meet their own agenda. But of course this case, it's what has not been reported, which is the key factor. So at the moment, all of the onus is, of course, pointing that the mother is the criminal. However, information that has come into the UK column, and I know there are other websites carrying this story as well. I think Alice Through the Looking Glass is one of them, are saying actually there's much more background to this. And what about other partners involved in this particular case? But there seems to be a complete media blackout on any balance in the story. So there's something very, very strange about this case. It is Nottingham, of course, with its appalling track record in protecting children who have been abused. And of course, it was Nottingham Constabulary that were hounding and harassing and victimising Melanie Shaw when she reported child abuse. And on that note, we should also remind people that Melanie Shaw's still in prison. But the main case that comes to my mind, Mike, is Linda Lewis from South Wales. This is going back many years, but essentially Linda took her daughter to America in order to get a medical diagnosis, which she did. But in Florida, American police, one of the officers drawing his guns, and Neath Port Talbot Social Services simply took the daughter, flew her back to UK on a false passport, and that little girl was put in a psychiatric unit and told that her pain was imaginary. So social services, once they can touch a child, and remember, any child that social service can actually put their hands on, a value of £70,000, that's the figure. The moment there's contact between the state and a child, £70,000, and everything that happens thereafter creates money through the courts, through clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, whoever's brought in. More and more money starts to circulate around the children. So two boys, very valuable assets, Mike.
Yes, and of course we have dealt with quite a number of cases which seem to be running on the same kind of template. Cheryl Stannard being another one, where you know the mother has gone to social services for help and discovered the system turn on them like a rabid dog.
And of course that is the basis of the Hampstead case, which has now got almost a manic response from police and authorities in London. There will be more. Well, let's bring in this. This is a couple that have been fighting for their baby son, baby Charlie. And it's gone to court because essentially they're now waiting for a judge to decide whether the little boy is going to die. But it's a tragic case, but what is of great interest in this case is that the parents are saying that basically doctors at Great Ormond Street were hampering what they were trying to do to actually find cure for their little boy themselves. And it's a little bit small on screen, but this is some of the text. It says, the Great Ormond Street medic, who cannot be named, said Connie Yates and Chris Guard's hunt for hospitals around the world to save the little boy had delayed the decision about their son's fate. The court heard that when Charlie's parents started researching his condition themselves and contacted experts around the world, one of his Great Ormond Street doctors described this in an email as parent-driven and a spanner in the works. So this was pretty aggressive stuff. And the last one here asked if it was an appropriate way to describe parents on a hunt for treatment for their child. The doctor replied, "It's a bit clumsy, but I was trying to suggest that our previous decision to take this to the court as urgently as we could was being held up by something being explored that needed to be explored." So I think there was a sudden change of heart by that doctor in the court. But we have heard this many times from parents that when they've challenged the medical profession over what has been happening, treatment in hospitals, care of patients, doesn't have to be children, can be elderly parents, that there's been a very aggressive response from those doctors, of course, fully supported by the General Medical Council.
Other news, still with the Mail, amazingly enough, the headline on this is Vegan Mother is Forced to Vaccinate Her 2 Children After High Court Judge Overrules Her Objections. This was a pretty unfortunate case in the sense that it was a mother and a father having a different view on the merits of vaccination. The mother deciding for herself that she did not want her children to be vaccinated, the father saying that the children should be vaccinated. And what has unfortunately happened here is that this has gone to court, and now we seem to have a precedent being set once again of the court overruling the decisions of one or other parent. You know, she is looking at this on the basis that she does not want her children vaccinated, that she's not convinced that vaccines are safe, and that she's not convinced that vaccines work. And so, you know, the court has decided that her view is not appropriate, and that the children will be vaccinated forcibly. That's not the best situation for a liberty standpoint.
Absolutely not, and ties in, Mike, with the named persons scheme in Scotland, where a lady member of the Scottish Parliament said quite calmly, well, don't worry about our system because parents will also have a role in bringing up their children. So now we've got clearly in England, parents, your children are not your own. A judge can be in a secret court, not a jury. A judge simply decides that your child can be injected, even though we're seeing more and more evidence of dangers of vaccines.
Right. Well, let's move on to Syria once again, and of course the gas attack, the alleged gas attack, continues to dominate the headlines. This is the White Helmets video that was released, at least parts of it, released to show what the aftermath of this event was. These people allegedly having suffered from sarin nerve gas, or sarin seems to be still the words that are being used in the mainstream press. So we have autopsy reports from Turkey now, because apparently some of the bodies were taken to Turkey, and they're saying that it was nerve gas.
Can I just interject here,
yes.
Mike, and say for viewers, just look at the way these people are handling victims who are apparently, who are suffering. They're being lifted around as though they're bags of cement. It's quite extraordinary.
Right, and the question is, what were the circumstances that caused this to take place? We have commented on this in the past with regard to the white helmets. You can see the guy there with white helmets, and there's a guy will appear in a second with a white helmets hat on. So this has all come from the white helmets, and we've commented on their standard of medical care in the past. And so if these people have in fact been affected by some kind of chemical attack, the question is, Brian, how much extra damage has been done by the lack of care and the handling of these people? Well,
in this clip at one point, or in part of the film that this clip is taken from, as one example, you can see an adult who is dumped on top of a low loader trailer to the extent that you see his head hit the metal deck of the lorry. So this is very brutal, callous handling of people severely injured. But we've got to be accurate, and we have to be graphic in this. One of the symptoms of sarin poisoning, the effects of that nerve gas, is that people invariably vomit and they lose control of their bowels. So you are going to end up with people whose clothing is badly soiled, and this is not what we're seeing here. The hosing down, I believe, is a crude attempt to make it look as though they are dealing with some form of nerve agent, that they're washing it off. But the reality of the case is that these things are so dangerous and so toxic that nobody without a respirator or with bare skin could possibly get near one of these victims, certainly for a good few hours. So it's absolutely remarkable that we've got people lifting these bodies as if they're pieces of meat, dumping them into the backs of wagons, and no protective clothing whatsoever.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the people that were dealing with the sarin attack in Japan in the early 90s were wearing. This is the type of thing that people wear whenever they are dealing with sarin or similar type of nerve agents.
Well, this is obviously a civilian team, but they're fully dressed up. The rule is you cannot have any bare skin whatsoever, rubber gloves, a full protective suit, and you've got to have at least a specific respirator or a proper full breathing outfit. And these are the protections that have to be taken if it is this type of nerve agent being used. So there is a lie about this whole incident. Of course, we picked up the Times for claiming that it was sarin. Absolutely no evidence whatsoever from the British newspaper, The Times. We challenged the journalists. What we see is snippets of information cobbled together. And now we've got the white helmets abusing people who have clearly suffered something. But the story appears to be all based on the lie that a chemical weapon, sarin, has been used. And of course, if it's sarin, that makes it easy to try and blame it on the Syrian government, because allegedly they had stockpiles. If it isn't sarin, if it is some form of chemical that's been released, well, this would fit the picture with the terrorists, of course.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. But other images starting to make appearances on Twitter and so on, of course, and people are asking about some of the dead children in this, and some of these children seeming to be exhibiting injuries which are not related to a chemical attack. So these children having head injuries which look more like the type of blunt force trauma you might receive at the end of a rifle butt, is what is being alleged in this tweet. What exactly is going on here? We have time and time again reiterated the fact that the white helmets are effectively Al-Nusra Front. They are Al-Qaeda. So, we've got to take everything, any video that is labeled a white helmets video, with that in mind. And let's just highlight this tweet. This is from Sarah Abdallah. Wow, this anti-Assad reporter, in inverted commas, tweeted about the sarin attack in Syria 24 hours before it happened. Still think nothing fishy is going on. So the Arabic there says, tomorrow a media campaign will begin to cover intense air raids on the Hama countryside and the use of, this says the use of chlorine against civilians, but nonetheless.
Well, I think that's a very significant comment there, because chlorine, of course, would still be capable of killing and would still be capable of causing huge problems. So we get a warning 24 hours in advance about a chlorine attack. Is the Assad government at the stage where they're starting to get the country back together? They're opening dialogue, possibly through to America. Is Assad going to use chemical weapons? Is he going to use sarin? This does not make sense at all.
No, it doesn't. We're going to come on to that in a second as well.
I'm jumping ahead there,
It's
Mike.
absolutely fine. But let's just remember that, of course, you mentioned that Assad may have had sarin in the past, but also the Syrian rebels have been identified as having sarin nerve gas, because, of course, as Vanessa Beeley has said on many occasions, chlorine and sarin have been picked up by the rebels as they had taken control of Syrian
military
facilities.
Yeah.
Now, back in December 2016, 21st Century Wire with Patrick Henningsen, interviewed an MIT research affiliate, a former US congressional staffer, Subrata Gushroy, and they discussed his analysis of the United Nations report on the alleged Syrian chemical weapons incident in 2013 in eastern Ghouta in Damascus. And he was explaining how unqualified people were posing as experts at that time, delivering bogus evidence to the UN at that time, and that resulted in fraudulent conclusions in the UN report. But at the end of the day, the evidence isn't there. And for example, as a number of people have been pointing out across the media over the last 24 hours, this could quite possibly have been a normal, if there's anything normal about it, this could quite possibly have been a normal air attack by the Syrian government on terrorists in the Idlib area, on an arms dump which contained chemical weapons, in which case the Syrian government is not responsible for the chemical release, because the weapons should not have been there in the first place. And bearing in mind that most of these so-called rebels are Western backed, then it's down to our governments to make sure that those people don't have that type of material.
Yeah, and evidence, a lot of evidence that the terrorists have been using schools as bases from which to conduct the fighting. So children automatically put at risk if they're in the area.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to remind everybody about this one, because this, excuse me, demonstrates how easy it is to manipulate the news. This is a Daily Mail once again. For a report from a year or so ago, Iraqi special forces poised an eastern edge of Mosul, and in it were images of a car bombing, and some children standing behind it. And if you remember, we highlighted the gate there, and we highlighted the graffiti on the wall. There's another image of it with the gate and the graffiti, and then we showed this. There's the gate and the graffiti from a video clip. And let's have a look at the video clip, because this is very telling. So here we have a guy standing at a car beside the graffiti on the wall. He runs away from the car, or he moves away very quickly from the car, gets into a 4x4 and drives away, and the car explodes. So this is the car bomb from the Daily Mail article. The car explodes at the wall in 1 second. And as soon as the car has exploded, the dust is just about to clear, and the next thing, the crisis actors run on stage, and the next thing we have what is a media story of people lying injured and apparently dead. At least this is what they're pretending to be. So these people are all actors running into the scene, lying down beside the burning car, and then we've got the people coming in, panicking and gesticulating and pretending to be in a state of panic. So this is how easy it is to present a story fraudulently. And the fact is, the Daily Mail published the photographs of this without any due diligence.
And we're seeing this more and more, that obviously the reporters are just picking up stuff willy-nilly off the internet. They think that because they've got internet sources in the Middle East, that these sources can just be then brought into British newspapers. So the Times got very wobbly yesterday when we challenged them over the validity of sarin. The lady was very nice, but once I'd said to her, look, this cannot be right. What was the next thing? Perhaps you might like to write to the letters editor. Well, no, I don't think so. This is to do with accuracy of reporting and fake news.
Right, let's move on then to the UN Security Council. Excuse me. So the United States, the UK, and France put in a UN resolution yesterday to try to deal with Syria following this alleged incident, and Russia and China vetoed that, with one other country whose name escapes me at the moment. And what then happened was that Matthew Rycroft absolutely seems to have gone off his head and making derogatory comments about Russia in particular. So Russia then put in a draft resolution of their own, calling for a true investigation into the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria, because the Russians are not going to take this lying down, as it were. They want to have a proper investigation into exactly what happened here. But Matthew Rycroft had said that by defending the Syrian government, that Russia makes Syria's population suffer. He said each and every abuse of their veto has consequences for the people of the town in the attack. These consequences have been unspeakable. And so he went on. The Russians took that pretty badly. They said that Rycroft's comments were beyond the bounds of diplomatic decency. They're absolutely inadmissible. They should not be repeated, and we will no longer listen to this. I thought that the British diplomacy had long parted with these rudimentary methods. We need to think seriously about this. I repeat that we will not be able to resolve the Syrian crisis and other world problems, including aggressive terrorism, without joining forces in earnest. We are ready for collective work. So again, in the Security Council, okay, they vetoed this resolution because they understood the consequences of it, or they understood what was behind this resolution. But the Russians, once again, saying we're only going to deal with ISIS if we work together. And Matthew Rycroft doing nothing but hurling abuse directly at the Russian. It's just obscene, Brian.
But
this is not
he's being
diplomacy.
outplayed, isn't he? You're getting this reaction because he's basically not up to the job, and the Russians are applying truth to the situation. So he's exposed.
Absolutely. So let me bring in Peter Ford at this point, the former ambassador to Syria, former UK ambassador to Syria, because of course you mentioned US-Russia relations. And so there's two interesting things about the timing of this event. The fact, number one, that it happened at the moment that Boris Johnson was in Brussels to discuss Syria at that big Brussels meeting that we covered yesterday, and also the fact that the US, at least Trump, was clearly making roads towards normalizing relations with Russia. And of course, this is exactly the problem. This event seems to have turned that around. So Trump said the attack, quotes, crosses many, many lines, and that was really referring to what Obama had talked about in the past with the red line and all this kind of nonsense. Trump said, I will tell you what happened yesterday is unacceptable to me, he said, and I will tell you it's already happened that my attitude towards Syria and Assad has changed very much. And then he was asked whether he's going to formulate a new policy in Syria, and Trump had said, you'll see. Well, we've hinted that perhaps there's already a new policy on Syria from the United States, but nonetheless, Rex Tillerson heading over to Russia next week, and what effect has this event had on those meetings? Sorry. So here we have Peter Ford, as I say, and he was giving an interview on Sky News, and he basically said, now, if the jihadis wanted to complicate tasks, Trump of making America's policy more sensible, America's policy with regard to Syria, that is, they wouldn't have gone about it any other way than trying to mount a piece of fake news like this. So that was referring to the chemical attack. He's quite clearly stating his view that it is a piece of fake news.
Yeah, it's fake news, but the key question remains, where are these children coming from? The children are either clearly dead or seriously injured in some way. It's almost like children being held for props by these people. There's something very, very dark and sinister going on here. And of course, we're not seeing any questions from the BBC or any of the British mainstream media into what is actually taking place. There's just this continuation of pumping out stories based on not a lot, no proper investigation. It's serious state of affairs, Mike, I think.
Brian, the evidence that Vanessa Beeley and I are seeing is that ISIS is directly involved in people trafficking, in children trafficking for sex, and for other things. They're trafficking children. They're using them for medical experimentation. They're using them for organ trafficking. That's absolutely clear now. When you say, where have these bodies of children come from? ISIS are doing some really nasty stuff with the cooperation of our governments, it seems.
Yeah.
And that needs to be dealt with. And then just to mention cooperation of our governments, it's not just cooperation of governments, it's also cooperation of our mainstream media. And this is a disgrace. This is The Guardian carrying an article from Raid Saleh, the head of the White Helmets. The jury is no longer out. The jury has decided, because the White Helmets, as we've said many, many times now, too closely linked to Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front, for this to be an acceptable publication within The Guardian that his propaganda is just distributed in this way. This man was refused entry to the United States twice last year because of his direct links to extreme terrorism in Syria, and why The Guardian is publishing articles by him. I can offer no explanation for that.
Well, perhaps the United States will now say that they're not going to let anybody who works for The Guardian into America because they're assisting terrorists. That would be an interesting state of affairs. Well, let's bring in local Tory MP Gary Streeter, my personal MP. This is the man that doesn't want to talk about the state of the military. But in yesterday's Evening Herald, local Plymouth newspaper, I spotted this article. His say, Gary Streeter, Conservative MP for South West Devon, fanatics will not destroy way of life. And this is an article about what it was like to be in Westminster while the terrible terrorist attack in London was taking place, how they were ushered into rooms, how they were informed, how people were phoning their families or being phoned by their families to make sure they were all okay. This is all hype about the elite in Westminster, but it was this paragraph that caught my attention. Let's bring it here. How fortunate we are to have such skillful, brave and professional security and police officers keeping us all safe in the Palace of Westminster. How saddened we were to learn more details of the tragic loss of life. How glad we were that the attacker had been shot dead. This is a Christian MP. Let's remind ourselves this is the man who also voted for bombs to be dropped on Syria. He's glad that a man is shot dead, but of course that man is shot dead, so there's no evidence, there's no investigation for the British public. But this whole article is about us, the politicians, and we're safe because we're in our little fortress surrounded by police with submachine guns. Honestly, I have to say, I think this is one of the most sickening articles that I have seen. Time that these MPs got off their backsides, got out there, started to ask questions as to why their aggressive policies in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Syria, this is where the terrorism has come from, hasn't it, Mr. Streeter? I won't expect a reply to that question. Well, let's bring in the Great Moot, 22nd of April in Nottingham. This is a fantastic venue. We are pushing it as hard as possible because we have had people saying to us for so long, what we need is time, excuse me, to be together in order to exchange ideas and expertise and talk about what is really happening in this country. So over 900 places, ticket sales have been going well, but we would like to see this hall packed full of good people who are there to try and do something to stop what is happening in UK. And if you say to me today, what is happening in UK in 2017, I say a dictatorship is installing itself very, very quickly. And as we've seen from Mike's report earlier, it's a dictatorship which will simply control your children. It doesn't matter what your view as a parent is, the state is going to dictate what happens to your children, never mind what it's got planned for you. So if you're beginning to feel passionate about what's happening in UK, it doesn't matter what colour you are, what religion you are, what your background is, come along to that event. Tickets, £10 on the door. And sorry, we'll add this one in here as well. UK column, we do what we do Monday to Friday with a remarkably small team. And if you like what we are doing, then we say, please support us with subscriptions or donations, because we can't do it without that support. Would we like more people subscribing? Of course, because we would like to expand the news coverage that we're providing. And we can only do that by being able to take on additional people and at least cover their basic costs to do so. So if you're not a subscriber, please get onto the UK Column website and join us and become part of what we think is the only proper news service that's operating in UK today.
Tonight, Ian Crane is in the studio. So 7:30, the Crane Report, he'll have Thomas Sheridan on with him. And at 9 p.m, the Fracking Nightmare. And he is really focusing on the increasingly aggressive behaviour of the police. And I think even in the 2 weeks since the last Fracking Nightmare, the aggressiveness of the police with the protection community has increased enormously. So join us at live, ukcolumn.org/live for those 7:30 and 9 p.m. Of course, we'll rerun this news in between.
We'll just say Mike is suffering a little bit with a cold, and there's a little bit of something hovering around us. So I know a few people are picking up a bit of wobbliness in the voices. We're doing the best we can today.
Yes. So where are we? Right, online censorship. Germany approves bill curbing online hate crimes and fake news. Now, Germany, a bit special in its sort of online rules and regulations, but this is a new bill which has to go in front of Parliament, of course, but will potentially impose fines of up to 50 million euros on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms if they do not remove certain types of content as quickly as possible. So they need to ensure, obviously, criminal content as defined by German law, according to this article from Associated Press, will be deleted within 24 hours and other illegal content after 7 days. So, Brian, this is a pretty spectacular shutdown, potentially of free speech on the internet, and focusing on the big social media platforms. I think maybe this, in a sense, would be a good thing. Because at the moment, unfortunately, we have 2 or 3 really big social media platforms that are basically monopolies, and if they start through this type of coercion, being quite draconian with the type of restrictions they place on content, that might force people. We might see a bit of a diversification of the types of platform that we get to use.
Interesting standpoint, Mike, and it dovetails in extremely well with this. Let's bring on the big boy, which is Google. This is day 3 of silence from Google after I sent them an email simply asking for more details about the takedown of the Holly Gregg Justice blogspot. So the website that had over 1.7 million views, with people looking at the details of the cover-up around the abuse of Down syndrome Holly Gregg. Google, when I called them this morning, very, very jittery. I think what Google is doing is what these big companies normally do, which is pass all of the problem to the front-end media. So the man who had to speak to me was clearly in a very difficult position. He's promised that Google is going to respond to the UK column questions. But of course, we say that the takedown was done at the behest of the Scottish government after they received letters challenging particularly Nicola Sturgeon over child abuse in Scotland. So very interesting to see multi-billion-dollar company, but you bring in the truth and suddenly it's starting to get very wobbly indeed. Right, so we took a little look at we took a little look at Google's track record in free expression. We've got Google Take Action here, free expression, and they say, well, it's vital that we have free expression over the internet because that's the only way we're going to have freedom. So well done, Google, but it appears that if you are campaigning to stop the abuse of children, then Google is getting a little bit wobbly about whether it still believes there should be free speech. We can come in on this one. Google battles for internet free speech. This is CBC News. Google brings internet free speech battle to the Supreme Court. Do go and have a look at this particular article because the main thing is very interesting to read. And what have we got here? Armed with the support of human rights and civil liberties organisation, Google is at the Supreme Court of Canada on Tuesday to appeal a ruling it says poses a threat to freedom of expression and access to information both in Canada and around the world. Google wants to overturn a Canadian ruling, it says, which could pave the way for countries to use their courts to block worldwide access to any internet content they don't like. And here we've got Google apparently helping the Scottish government to do exactly that. Is this to close down a porn site? Is it to close down a child abuse site? No, this is to close down a site which is posting publicly available evidence that the Scottish government has been complicit in covering up the abuse of children. So you couldn't get more hypocritical than this, Mike, and I wonder whether it's why Google's taken 3 days so far to come up with a response to a very simple question. Well, let's give them a little bit more attention. This was in the press a little while ago, and of course it was the fact that Google, in its very cosy relationship with the Tory party, was able to pay, I think it was 130 million, which is probably about tuppence to Google. But of course, if you've got friends in the Conservative Party, and this is Eric Schmidt from Google in 2006 talking at the Conservative Party conference, if you've got the right friends, you can adjust your tax bill appropriately. But let's remember that it's Nicola Sturgeon who's in the spotlight, because we're pretty confident that it's Nicola Sturgeon's office that has driven this Google takedown. So we are asking the question, my question to our audience today is, how many of those of you watching or listening to us today have also been emailing the Scottish Government and Google to ask what this massive attack on free speech is all about?
Right, a couple of defence stories today. The Light Dragoons, the British Army's Light Dragoons, have arrived in Poland as part of the UK's commitment to NATO's enhanced forward presence in Europe, so that's good stuff. 150 UK personnel have travelled in from their base at Catterick Garrison, and they are well, enjoying themselves in Poland, heading off to Estonia and doing some stuff over there to annoy the Russians, I think. And then the other piece of news is on the F-35, because apparently, well...
I'm laughing again, Mike. We got to the point in the news where we're now in La La Land.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, yes, indeed. So, well, basically, deep maintenance and repair of the engines for the F-35 is going to be done in Turkey, apparently.
Right, so let's get this right. Our warships, perfectly decent, serviceable warships, are sent to Turkey to be scrapped, and then when we get the F-35, which is supposedly going to get our carriers to sea and operational, who's going to maintain them? Turkey is.
Yes, well, apparently this is because there are 9 F-35 partner nations: the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Italy, Norway, the Netherlands, and Turkey. And that each of them is going to have, or they're going to share maintenance tasks between all of those people. So there's also going to be some maintenance done in Australia, for example. And the Ministry of Defence said the UK's security of supply of F-35's engines is not impacted by this. They say the F-35 is an international programme with maintenance and repair hubs in Europe, North America, Asia Pacific, and a global support network that ensures security of supply for all involved. The UK, along with the other F-35 partner nations, benefit from this approach and the efficiencies it delivers. Efficiencies.
Right. So we can't do it ourselves because that would be inefficient, but we're going to give it to Turkey to do, because that obviously the Turks are a lot more efficient than we are.
Yes, because if you've got a broken F-35, the best thing to do is to ship it halfway around the world in order to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is really excellent. I look forward to the response from those retired senior British military officers. Perhaps they could take a day out from the golf club to actually wake up to the reality that Theresa May and Michael Fallon are now simply taking Britain's military apart. Of course, the light tank, the Dragoons, they're going to Poland, Mike. This is all to give the public the idea that everything's okay.
Yeah.
So you give the public the impression we've still got military, but behind the scenes it's being dismantled.
Right, just briefly, piece of fake news from The Independent here. UK government in secret move to boost relations with Russia. Now, to be honest, I looked at this headline and said, well, I'm not even going to bother reading the article, because the headline told me straight away that this is fake, because it's not a secret move if The Independent is publishing it. Well, the Russian embassy decided they would make a little bit of poke a little bit of fun at this. So they said, "Keck, but one can't secretly boost relations while scolding your secret love in public. Why not let why not let oneself go?" So the Russians once again taking it in a certain way.
But I have to say that their dry sense of humour that's coming out, they're doing exceptionally well. I feel a certain engagement with this sense of humour.
Yes.
Yeah. What more can we say?
Yeah. We've got 5 minutes. So
Okay. Well,
yeah,
we'll carry on.
This is me.
This is you.
Oh, sorry. Right. Foreign aid. Now it soars by 1.2 billion pounds. This again, Daily Mail, and I cannot get to grips why they do not attempt to join the dots. So they're busy complaining about foreign aid spending by the UK, which has promised to spend 0.7% of national income on overseas projects every year. MPs and various others commenting that the 0.7% target has to go, but the Daily Mail not explaining in any way why the government is spending this money in the first place. And in fact, if you read on down through this article, they have a section entitled "How They've Lined Up for the UK Overseas Cash Handouts," and it shows a picture of some people in Pakistan or somewhere like that queuing up for cash through the overseas aid budget. And in the text they say Britain gave £4 million to Ethiopia's version of the Spice Girls in a wider programme aimed at empowering women in the East African country. A further 5.2 million was granted to an all-girl pop group, and so on. So they're making fun of this, Brian, and they're not looking at the cultural implications of the British government putting £4 million into an Ethiopian version of the Spice Girls, or the cultural implications of £5.2 million going to an all-girl pop group in other countries. They're not looking at what this money is being spent on. This is British soft power. This is what the First Sea Lord said. Let's get the aid in, because by getting the aid into countries, we can get British power into those countries. Right. And so does the Daily Mail not yet understand what Theresa means by global Britain? This is what she's talking about. Well, I think the answer to that, Mike, is they don't, because their journalists haven't got the mental acumen to actually grip this sort of analysis. All they're interested in doing is being at the desk, churning out the stories, getting paid at the end of the day. So this is the state of Britain's press industry at the moment. Well, let's bring in Mr. Khan, because, of course, he's heading up one of the biggest world city-states in the making. And he said this: across the country, more than 40,000 people die because of poor quality air, to which we've added, except they don't. This is all part of lies, damn lies and statistics. But of course, probably the first thing to say is maybe Mr. Khan has been sussed by Guido Fawkes, who's put up this, that it's very interesting. If you have a look on his page, there is a typo here, which I'll apologise, I'll point it out in a moment. But basically, what were his pre-election promises? That he was going to build 80,000 homes a year, he was going to plant 2 million trees, he was going to reduce bus fares. That should be. That's unfortunate, isn't it? And all of the pledges have not been kept. So Guido says, don't trust this man. But what is he doing? He's getting charging in. Date announced for London ultra low emission zone. It's going to have extra charges whether you've got a diesel car or a petrol car. And the BBC here pointing out that Mr. Khan had recently been across in Paris talking about air pollution. So this is what it's going to do. Charges of £12.50 to drive through central London. Buses, coaches and HGVs will have to pay £100. So there's nothing about raising taxes. And of course, this is all to do with Euro 4 standards, European standards, but we're out of the EU, aren't we, Mike? Yeah, but the problem is that these standards, of course, being pushed through the EU, but this is a wider global agenda at work. Absolutely. Well, Reality Check had a look at this and said, well, don't worry, because this is a statistical construct, not a count of deaths. Excuse me? It's a statistical construct, not a count of deaths. With an eye on the clock, we'll say to people, go to BBC Reality, because the last thing you're going to find there is reality, but you can find an explanation, but not an explanation of what a statistical construct is.
We went somewhere else. We went to the Office of National Statistics, where it states very clearly that the death rate in 2016 is the second lowest since 2001. That is the pollution, presumably, Mike.
Yes.
Okay. And here we are, the European Union enforce Euro 6. This is the European Union directive which is driving the raising of taxes in London, but we're out of the EU.
Yes.
And we'll end there. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, hopefully with David Scott, Northern Exposure, reporting from north of the border. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.